Imagine waking up to a world changed overnight. A world where the simple act of turning on a light or heating your home is no longer guaranteed. Picture a nation thrown into chaos, not by war in the traditional sense, but by the silent, invisible hand of energy cut off at its source. This is not a dystopian fantasy or a cautionary tale from another era. This is Finland, today, where the future went dark, not by accident, but by design. Last night, Russia crossed a line few believed it ever would. It halted every molecule of natural gas flowing into Finland. There was no warning, no gradual squeeze, no backroom negotiation, just a swift, merciless shutoff. News broke before dawn in Helsinki, where the newly elected president, Alexander Stubb, reportedly found himself scrambling for answers, pleading with Moscow to restore the energy lifeline his country depended upon. For Finland, the consequences struck instantly, like a hammer shattering glass. But for the rest of Europe, a colder, more unsettling truth settled in. Energy is no longer just a utility. It is now a weapon, one with the power to bring nations to their knees before sunrise. As winter approaches, cities and industries across the continent now stand exposed, forced to admit a reality many preferred to ignore. Security can disappear in a single, chilling moment. This is not a crisis of abstract geopolitics debated in distant conference rooms. It is about shivering homes, silent factories, and families forced to contemplate the unthinkable: how to survive the coming freeze. The long-standing belief in European stability and unity has been shattered by a single, ruthless act. Moscow's message to the world is brutal and unmistakable. Gas is leverage. Dependency is weakness. The balance of power across Europe is being rewritten, one closed valve at a time. If a nation as proud and modern as Finland can be brought to its knees in a single night, who among us is truly safe now? But how did it come to this? And what does it mean for the rest of Europe? The story behind Russia's energy strike goes far deeper than the latest headlines suggest. To understand this crisis, we must peel back the layers of history, economics, and ambition. Picture waking in Finland to a silence so deep it chills the bones. Not because of snow, but because the country's lifeline has been severed overnight. In the earliest hours before dawn, Moscow delivered a single cold command: stop every molecule of Russian gas flowing to Finland. There was no warning, no gradual decline, just a ruthless, immediate blackout in the pipelines, with shockwaves rippling far beyond Helsinki and deep into the heart of Europe. For Finland, a nation that only recently joined NATO, this is the gravest energy crisis in living memory. Factories, power stations, and ordinary homes once powered by Russian gas are paralyzed, searching frantically for answers. The Kremlin's message is unmistakable. This is payback for what Moscow calls hostile acts and Western sanctions. Gas, once mere commerce, is now Russia's sharpest weapon, wielded with icy calculation. President Alexander Stubb, newly elected and untested by fire, is caught off guard. Within moments, his administration is plunged into chaos. Emergency meetings are called throughout the night. Desperate calls to European allies echo unanswered, as every diplomatic avenue seems to end in a wall. On the streets, panic buying erupts. Industrial shutdowns are threatened. The nation's heat and light now hang by a thread, held hostage by decisions made far beyond Finnish borders. The stakes are staggering. Whole industries teeter on the brink. Tens of thousands of livelihoods are suddenly in jeopardy. The fragile social fabric, the fine line between calm and chaos, now depends on the Kremlin's whims. For families, warmth, work, and even hope are no longer guarantees. This is no distant crisis. It is a new, brutal reality, one that could ignite across Europe with terrifying speed. But what pushed Moscow to take such an uncompromising step against Finland? And why is the fallout so catastrophic? The answers reveal a darker, deeper game of power, with consequences that threaten the very foundation of Europe's security. To understand the roots of this crisis, we must pull back the curtain on months of simmering tensions and clandestine moves. The battle for energy supremacy in Europe began long before the pipelines went silent. For decades, Russia played the role of reliable supplier, sending natural gas through a spider's web of pipelines into Europe's heart. In the 1970s, during the height of the Cold War, Western Europe grew accustomed to Soviet and later Russian gas. It was cheap, abundant, and seemed immune to the storms of politics. Even when tanks rolled and rhetoric flared, the gas almost always flowed. But this relationship was always fraught with risk, one that grew with every new pipeline. When the gas stops, the illusion of control shatters. In one swift, ruthless move, Russia closes the valves, plunging Finland into a crisis that exposes the hidden weakness at the heart of Europe's energy security. For years, Finland's harsh winters have depended on the steady pulse of Russian gas, a lifeline abruptly severed with a single turn. The fallout is immediate and unforgiving. Factories, giants of paper, steel, and glass, fall silent, their machines stalled and workers sent home. The threat of mass layoffs and economic collapse hangs heavy in the air. At home, a cold panic spreads as families rush to buy heaters and firewood, desperate for any hope of warmth as the temperature drops. Old memories of past shortages resurface, now sharpened by the urgency of the present. Historical parallels abound. In the winter of 2009, a similar crisis unfolded when Russia cut off gas to Ukraine, leaving much of Eastern Europe shivering in the cold. Back then, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and other nations found themselves scrambling for alternatives, rationing supplies, and even shutting schools and factories to conserve energy. Today, Finland faces a crisis of equal or greater magnitude, but with far higher stakes, and the world is watching. In the midst of this turmoil, President Stubb faces an excruciating choice. Barely weeks into his term, he is forced to plead with Moscow for the fuel his nation cannot live without. Insiders describe tense, humiliating calls. Finland's leader stripped of leverage, his authority eroded by dependence. The dignity of the office gives way to a new public vulnerability. But the crisis does not end at Finland's border. In Brussels, European leaders scramble, but unity is already unraveling. Behind closed doors, each government weighs its own risks, fearing shortages, calculating losses, and silently asking who will be next. Promises of solidarity crack under the pressure of national self-preservation. Meanwhile, the Kremlin observes with cold detachment. The message is unmistakable. This is not just about Finland. Any nation that defies Moscow risks losing the energy that fuels its industry and keeps its people alive through winter. Gas has become Russia's weapon, not merely for profit, but for dominance, deterrence, and public humiliation. Europe now teeters on the brink. Reliable heat, economic stability, even the very idea of European unity are all in jeopardy. Leaders must choose, confront Moscow and gamble with further escalation, or yield and accept dependence, alongside the sting of lost pride and autonomy. But just as Finland's hopes flicker, a new and unexpected player enters the fray. An audacious move from across the Atlantic shifts the stakes yet again. The United States, long a sideline observer in the European energy game, now sees a dramatic opportunity. American liquefied natural gas, LNG, becomes a lifeline, but one fraught with its own risks and costs. European governments scramble to secure shipments, outbidding each other in a desperate race to fill empty storage tanks before the worst of winter arrives. One closed pipeline sets off an unstoppable avalanche. Within mere hours, natural gas prices across Europe soar higher than at any point in living memory. Factories grind to a halt, household bills skyrocket. The shockwave does not stop at Finland's border. It surges across the continent and beyond. In Germany, chemical and automotive plants scale back production. In Italy, bakeries and small businesses limit hours or close entirely. In France, the government debates rationing programs last seen in the post-war years. Even in southern Europe, where winters are milder, the economic fallout is felt as energy-intensive industries face impossible choices: Desperate leaders scramble for lifelines. They call distant suppliers. But alternative gas is scarce, outrageously expensive, or long since claimed. Storage tanks once thought full now look disturbingly empty. Yesterday's reserves are today's cause for alarm. Liquefied natural gas, LNG, arrives by ship, but ports are jammed and infrastructure buckles under the strain. Chartering a single tanker costs a fortune, sometimes more than €1 billion for a single winter's worth of supply. The whole system becomes a frantic game of musical chairs, and winter's chill means not everyone will find a seat. Eastern European nations, who long warned of Russia's leverage, feel bitter vindication. Poland and the Baltic states, who invested early in LNG terminals and alternative pipelines, fare slightly better, but even the prepared are caught in the collapse. Unity frays as each government clings to its own dwindling supply, asking, who gets warmth and who is left to freeze? Russia has rewritten the rules. No longer just a supplier, Moscow now brandishes energy as a weapon, punishing adversaries, rewarding loyalty, and sending tremors through global markets. The message is cold and clear. Gas is power, and Russia alone decides who suffers and who survives. The illusion of European unity shatters under pressure. When survival demands sacrifice, old alliances splinter. Countries that once marched together now hoard, bargain, and break ranks, each seeking shelter from the gathering storm. This is the dawn of a new age, darker, harsher, and unforgiving. Energy is no longer a silent commodity. It is a weapon wielded in public view, a message sent in every shivering night and every darkened home. No one is spared, from presidents to the poorest families. The stakes rise to their zenith. Europe teeters on the edge of economic collapse and political crisis. The threat is not only cold homes, but torn societies and leaders facing impossible choices. Across the continent, people recall past crises, oil embargoes in the 1970s, the blackouts of World War II. But this time, the enemy is both outside and within, exploiting the vulnerabilities of a system long taken for granted. But the crisis is only beginning. What comes next will push Europe, and the world, to the breaking point. Europe's comfort was always a fragile illusion. Now, the reckoning has arrived. The era of cheap Russian gas is not merely disrupted, it has ended forever. For more than 5 decades, nations built prosperity and political calm atop a foundation that was never truly stable. They believed pipelines running east brought security, but in truth, those steel veins became shackles, binding millions of homes and entire economies to Moscow's unpredictable will. Now, with every valve sealed shut, that illusion vanishes. No government can afford to treat energy security as a secondary concern. Each nation must urgently reimagine its entire energy strategy. This calls for more than contingency plans or short-term rationing. What is needed is a permanent, root-and-branch shift away from the old model. Complacency is no longer just a risk, it is a mortal danger. The rules of survival have changed irreversibly. Diversification is no longer a slogan, but an existential imperative. Depending on a single supplier, especially one openly hostile, is not just an economic wager, it is a direct national security threat. Every government must invest decisively and at unprecedented scale, not only in renewables, but also in resilient grids, storage, and flexible backup sources. That means pouring vast resources into wind, solar, nuclear, and next-generation fuels, while forging strong cross-border interconnections. Regional solidarity now faces its harshest test in generations. The lesson is a bitter one. Declarations of unity and promises of support count for little unless matched by concrete planning, real investments, and above all, shared sacrifice. Countries must forge binding pacts that go beyond empty words, preparing to share supplies, burdens, and even endure rationing if necessary. Without this, unity is just paper, easily torn by the first cold eastern wind. A stark truth confronts everyone. The cost of energy dependence is no longer a distant fear. Without swift adaptation, millions may face freezing homes, lost livelihoods, and the slow, grinding decay of national economies. Inflation, unemployment, and social unrest will follow wherever leaders hesitate or falter. Yet those who move first, who invest, adapt, and cooperate, could not only survive, but shape the rules of this new, unforgiving era. This emergency is not solely for governments to solve. Personal resilience now matters more than ever. Households must learn to conserve, adopt new technologies, and prepare for an age in which certainty is gone. The ability to withstand shocks, economic, political, or simply the raw cold, will decide who weathers the storm and who is left behind. Dependence on hostile actors is no longer a manageable risk. It is a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. The choice is stark: adapt now or pay a devastating price. The old illusions have collapsed, and the real cost of energy dependence is being measured in lives, livelihoods, and national futures. But as Europe scrambles to adapt, Moscow's weaponization of gas is only the beginning. The world now faces a future where energy is a tool of war, and every nation must decide how to survive in this new order. If a single night can upend the fate of a nation, what would you do when it is your turn? What transpired in Finland is not merely Finland's burden. It is a flare in the dark, an unmistakable signal to every free society. With one twist of a valve, Russia proved that energy is no longer just fuel. It has become a weapon, unleashed without hesitation, able to bring even the proudest nations to their knees before sunrise. This is not a far-off crisis or a headline to scroll past. It is a warning of what could come for all of us. Imagine waking to cold homes, silent engines, and grocery stores struggling to keep the lights on. The price of dependence is not just higher costs. It is lost livelihoods, shuttered factories, and entire communities left exposed, powerless in every sense. Doing nothing now means surrendering control over your warmth, your work, your very future, to those with their hands on the switch. The illusion of energy security is broken. No speech or distant promise can restore the flow once it has been severed. This is a crossroads that demands action, not words. It is a reckoning with hard truths. Our systems are brittle, our alliances are strained, and our freedoms depend on choices made in boardrooms and war rooms far beyond our view. Waiting, or hoping this is someone else's crisis, is a risk we cannot afford. So what are the practical steps forward, for Europe, for every nation, and for each of us as individuals? First, governments must prioritize energy independence as a matter of national security. This means investing in domestic energy resources, building robust infrastructure for renewables, and ensuring that critical industries have backup power solutions. For example, Germany's Energiewende, a long-term plan to shift away from fossil fuels, has accelerated, with billions of euros now dedicated to expanding wind and solar capacity, and with new liquefied natural gas terminals under construction along the North Sea coast. France, too, is doubling down on its nuclear fleet, while Poland and the Baltic states expand interconnections to Scandinavian power grids, breaking the old East-West dependency. Second, regional cooperation must become more than a talking point. The European Union's solidarity mechanism, once a rarely used legal tool, is now being stress-tested as countries negotiate supply-sharing agreements and coordinate emergency reserves. Spain and Portugal, less reliant on Russian gas, are sending surplus supplies northward, while Norway, a key supplier, works overtime to maintain flows despite its own challenges. These efforts echo the collective mobilization seen during the oil crises of the 1970s, when nations pooled resources and coordinated rationing to weather the storm. Third, resilience at the household and community level is critical. Governments must incentivize the adoption of energy-efficient appliances, home insulation, and smart meters. Public campaigns promote simple steps, lowering thermostats by a few degrees, using programmable timers, and embracing communal heating solutions. In Finland, local authorities are reviving district heating networks, where entire neighborhoods share centralized, efficient heating plants that run on a mix of fuels, including biomass and waste-to-energy. Schools and municipal buildings are being retrofitted to serve as warming centers, ready to shelter those most vulnerable to the cold. Fourth, innovation and diversification are key. The race is on to develop next-generation energy storage, from massive battery banks to hydrogen power plants. Companies across Europe are investing in offshore wind farms, floating solar arrays, and geothermal drilling projects. The European Investment Bank has announced a historic package of loans and grants for green energy infrastructure, while startups in Denmark, the Netherlands, and Spain pioneer new technologies that could redefine how energy is generated and distributed. Fifth, public accountability and civic engagement must rise to meet the challenge. Citizens must demand transparency from their leaders, insisting that energy policy be guided by long-term strategy, not short-term expedience. Civil society organizations are stepping up, providing information, organizing mutual aid, and holding governments to account. As in past crises, from the London Blitz to the American energy crunch of 1973, resilience is not just about technology or money, it is about solidarity, shared sacrifice, and the strength of free societies to adapt and endure. Finally, we must accept a hard but liberating truth. The age of complacency is over. Every individual, every business, every nation must learn to live with uncertainty and to prepare for shocks that may come without warning. This means stockpiling essential supplies, developing local energy cooperatives, and fostering a culture of mutual aid. It means teaching our children not only to conserve, but to innovate, not only to endure, but to lead. The world stands at a crossroads. The choices made in the coming months and years will shape not only our comfort, but our freedom, prosperity, and security for generations to come. The lesson from Finland is clear. The old world is gone, and the new one will be forged by those bold enough to confront its challenges head-on. Because if a single night can upend the fate of a nation, then every day is an opportunity to shape a different future. The question is no longer whether the crisis will come. It is how we will respond when it does. Hold your leaders accountable. Demand real investment in resilient grids, energy independence, and robust plans for the next shock. Because if Finland can be plunged into darkness with a single decision, so can any nation. The future does not belong to those who beg for mercy, but to those who prepare. The time to act is now. The cost of inaction is simply too high.